Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1118B, and today's date is November 3rd, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Pentagon is Using Billions from a Slush Fund to Finance a Major Mobilization on Russia's Border. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we know the Brexit advisory referendum happened in the UK. Now, nothing has happened. The UK has not left the EU, and they needed to implement Article 50. And we can see that the UK was trying to have the government say, okay, let's do it, let's implement the Article 50, and let's start the process. But the UK High Court, they came down and they say, no, the government doesn't have the ability to do this. It has to be put to a vote, a parliamentary vote, and get approved to trigger Article 50. So the UK must hold a vote in Parliament before starting the 2-year countdown to Brexit. And we'll have to see how this goes. I know people are out there saying it's a victory, but not yet, because the Parliament still has to vote. The Parliament has to approve the Article 50 trigger. And if the Parliament doesn't approve this, and if, the EU, other governments get their hands into the different government individuals and persuade them to vote in a different way, this will never happen. So we're going to have to watch this very carefully and see what happens out in the UK. Now, we talk a lot about gun control, and we understand now why the US government, the central banks, want to control the flow of weapons here in the United States. Even though the United States is the biggest arms dealer and they supply millions and millions of weapons around the world, they're trying to keep the people from having weapons. And they usually use tricks to convince people that we need to do this. Of course, we know of the false flags, where they have these patsies and they use these events to convince people that there's mass shootings everywhere. And if you notice, they increased dramatically under Obama's reign, which is kind of suspicious in itself. But advocates of gun control, they employ several different sleight of hand rhetorical tricks. Number one, they always say that crime is increasing. And they keep repeating this same thing, that yes, crime is rising, homicide is rising, it's getting worse. And it all sounds good on the surface. But in reality, homicide rates in the United States in 2014 were at a 51-year low. They increased from 2014 to 2015, but remain near a 50-year low and near 1950s levels, which are recognized as an especially unhomicidal period in the United States. Now, for them to make a case that crime is increasing, homicides is increasing, everything's getting worse, what they do is they take a short-term period, often 1 year, to create the impression that there's an established trend of increasing crime. Number two, they're saying that we have the worst homicide rate, crime rate in the developed world. And of course, you need to define developed. What does that really mean? And when we look at different countries, like, for example, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Mexico, are those developed nations? Well, they have a functioning legal system. They're at peace. But we can see right now that they exclude those countries. And we see why, because they don't want to include those countries in the count, because it wouldn't make it look like America was worse off than every other developed country. It wouldn't support their narrative. And we can see right now that they also use suicide and homicide for their third way of tricking the public. Now, many people say it's the same, but really, it's a little different. And when we look at this, we can see that they created a category called gun violence, which sounds like what normal people call crime. But in reality, it's a crime mixed with suicide and homicide. And what they do is they use this tactic to push up gun violence numbers by including suicides, thus vastly increasing the total number of deaths that result from gun usage. And this is how they make their case. Number 4, gun homicide versus homicide. This is another trick where they manipulate language to hide crucial information. When making comparisons among U.S. states and various countries, gun control advocates often replace the term homicide with gun homicide. This is done because the United States has a larger share of homicides committed by firearms than other countries. However, it can be shown that some countries with more gun ownership have lower homicide rates than countries with higher gun ownership rates. For example, in Switzerland, gun ownership is common. 48% of homicides are committed with firearms. In neighboring Germany and Austria, the use of firearms in homicides is much lower, 24% and 10%. However, the homicide rate is slightly lower in Switzerland, 0.6 per 100,000, compared to Germany and Austria, which is 0.9 and 0.8 per 100,000. The fifth way is they rely on nationwide statistics. And as we know, the United States is much larger than many of the European countries and contains far greater variations in terms of geography, climate, culture, ethnicity than any European country outside of Russia. However, this does not stop many of them from comparing the United States with 320 million people to, say, Belgium, which only has 11 million people, and just a handful of metropolitan areas, which it's very hard to compare. And what you would have to do is take one of the states with the same population and compare it to that country. But they don't do that. They take the entire United States and they compare it to that one little country, where one of those little countries is the same size as one of our states. So they use many different tricks to convince us, but this is all part of a system, a part of an agenda to convince the American public, to convince the young that we should not own a weapon. And we know why at this point, because they're very nervous about the people owning weapons. And we can see why now with the elections coming up, because what happens when the people say, you know something? We don't want to go with the status quo anymore. We want to change. We don't want the same old, same old. Well, do you really think those in power are just going to say, you know what? Fine, take it. We don't want it anymore. Bring in your candidate. Bring in your outsider. No, what they're going to do is they're going to use manipulation. They're going to create the narrative that the person they want is winning. And they're going to do whatever they possibly can to keep the outsider out. They're just not going to give up their power. I mean, I know we have the elections coming up. And I know there's this huge scandal with the emails, where there's more and more of these emails coming out. The FBI is looking into it. Many people have different theories of what's going on. But we have to look past that a little bit and look at what's really happening here. The insiders are going to keep the outsiders out. They don't want them in here. And when they get in there, they take care of it. So what do they do to keep the outsider out? They manipulate, they lie, they cheat. And what they're most worried about is the American people having weapons saying, listen, we know what you're doing here. You're manipulating, you're cheating, you're lying. We want you out. They don't leave easily. They will use force on the American people. They don't care. They believe they're above we the people. This is how they see themselves. I would personally be shocked if Trump wins. I know a lot of people are out there who want Trump to win. I know a lot of people are saying that he's in the lead, that he's going to take it by storm. But I wouldn't put it past these individuals, the shadow government, the elite, to manipulate, cheat, and lie to keep their power. I would be shocked. I could be wrong. But from everything that I've been seeing and everything that I've been looking at, I would be very surprised. Now, there might be a situation where they try to manipulate and Trump does get in. I don't know how long he's going to last. They might even stop it before it even happens. This is why they've been preparing for all of this. Think about what they've been saying. Obama was out there saying that you cannot hack into the election system. There is no voter fraud. This is what they use as propaganda to convince the American people. Actually, the people that I speak to, they really do believe there's no voter fraud. They really do believe maybe in one little district, but overall, everything else is pretty honest. And they've been hyping up Russia cyber attacking, Russia releasing the emails, which we find out today that Russia had nothing to do with the release of the emails. But they've been preparing for this by using this type of propaganda. Because when things don't go their way, again, they will lie, they will cheat, they will do whatever they have to keep their power. Now, we understand that the United States government, central bankers, and other countries are in Ukraine beefing up their military, and now the U.S. is pledging $30 million to rebuild Ukraine's navy. And they're going to pay for the entire thing to build it up, just like they're doing their armed forces. Now, we have to remember, Ukraine is on the border of Russia. We understand that all the NATO countries are bordering Russia. They've been bringing in military assets, and they've been building the military and troops in the area for quite a while. And you don't do this just to do it. You do it because they have a reason coming up in the future. And we can see right now that they're going to continually do this because they're going to get something started. They want a war. It is completely evident from what they are doing. We talked about Duterte in the Philippines, who's moving away from the U.S. and siding with China. And we can see already, we've mentioned this before, where they most likely will do some type of regime change in the Philippines to get rid of Duterte because he's not cooperating with the United States government. If you don't cooperate, you must be removed. And we can see already there is travel warnings in the Philippines. The U.S. Embassy in Manila announced that terrorists are plotting to conduct kidnappings in the area. And they're putting out a notice to all U.S. citizens, avoid traveling to certain areas. If you don't have to be in the Philippines, please get out. So it looks like they are preparing and getting ready to do something in the Philippines. They're not waiting. They want the strategic location. They want to encircle China. And nothing's going to stop them. These people are completely crazy. They want what they want. They don't care who stands in their way. And they'll do whatever they have to get what they want. We see out in Mosul, the U.S. is fighting those individuals that do not want the puppet government in power. And the U.S. coalition, they're hitting residential areas in and around the Iraqi city. And we can see right now, no one is saying there's a humanitarian crisis. They're killing civilians. They're killing women and children. But it's okay when the U.S. does it. It's not okay when Russia and Syria do it. Kind of a double standard. We see U.S. Marines, they're using helicopter strikes in Libya. They're ramping up the offensive in Libya because we can see right now John Kerry was meeting with all the different coalition forces saying, listen, we need the unity government. we need to go in there now because the unity government, well, it's not going well for them. The people don't want them. So we must destroy the people, push them back, and allow the unity government to take power. This is what they're doing right now. The corporate media right now is acknowledging that there are more troops in Iraq than Obama has admitted. And this is coming out of the Washington Post. Now, we've been saying this for quite a while. Of course, their numbers are a little off. They're saying instead of 3,800 or 4,500 servicemen, it could be between 5,000 and 6,000 servicemen in Iraq. Well, we also have to remember one important thing, that the United States signed a deal with Iraq that there would be only, 4,500 or so permanent troops. The rest of the troops that are there, they're called temporary. They don't have an expiration date, but they don't come under the contract. They're not counted. They're only counting the permanent troops. If you count the temporary troops, it's around 15,000 troops already in Iraq. But we can see the corporate media, they have to start talking about it because people are saying, aren't there a lot more troops in there? Because we've been counting. And we've been looking at the temporary troops in there, and they're coming out with these ridiculous numbers. But we can see right now, all this time that we've been talking about that there's more troops than what they're saying, there are. We see that Turkey is building up their military power on the border of Iraq. And Iraq is saying, listen, don't even come into the country. We will dismantle you. And we see Turkey has tanks and troops on the border of Syria. They have tanks and troops on the border of Iraq. And we're going to have to watch the situation because this is building up for something very large. Now, the Pentagon, they are planning to pull billions of dollars from a slush fund. The slush fund is earmarked for war on terror. And they're going to take it because they don't need it anymore, of course, because where is the terror originating from? The United States. And they're going to take the billions of dollars and they're going to finance a major mobilization of tanks, troops, arms near the Russian border. You think they're preparing for something? We also say Britain. They are doing the same thing where they're mobilizing fighter planes to Romania with Germany, Canada, and other countries that are part of NATO. And we can see right now, they are preparing for war. They're not asking Congress. They're taking it from the money that they were using to fight terror. Well, terror really doesn't exist. This was just their slush fund that they were using for the wars in Afghanistan, for the wars in Iraq. And they're realizing right now the war with Russia is on. And we can see that Ashton Carter is saying that, yes, the U.S. is going to be mobilizing. It'll be financed by $3.4 billion of funds this year. And what we're seeing right now is that the sum is 4 times the amount allocated last year. So they're even upping the amounts. So where are they taking this from? They're taking it from the Overseas Contingency Operations Budget, which allows the Pentagon to sidestep the budget cuts, and it allows them to fund these wars. And of course, they also pay for these wars using the poppies that they are growing in Afghanistan, selling drugs across the world. This is how they pay for all these covert operations. We see the Islamic State fighters, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, the moderate rebels. They are preparing for their second phase of their wide-scale offensive on the government forces in Syria, in Aleppo. And we can see that they are pushing very hard and trying to push back the Syrian armed forces and the Russian forces, but it looks like it's not going anywhere. We see Russia right now is sending its advanced frigate Admiral Grigorovich, and it's armed with Caliber cruise missiles to reinforce the aircraft carrier group near the Syrian shores. We see they have their battle group there. Putin is showing that they are not going to leave this area. And they understand that the United States government central bankers, they're preparing to do something in this area. He's showing a lot of force, which tells you something. Russia right now, they're going to be sending in their own experts to collect evidence of chemical weapons usage. And they're sending in military experts from the Scientific Center of Troops of Radiological, Chemical, and Biological Defense on the Russian Armed Forces. And they have arrived in Aleppo to collect the samples. And they're looking at the UN report. They're looking at what has been happening in Syria. They have permission from the Syrian government. And they're going to take what they have and compare it to what the UN report says. And they're going to make determination of what the truth is. And we can see this must make the United States government central bankers and the UN a little nervous because someone is checking up on the work, which actually we should have. Why do we just believe something that someone is saying? Because when you read the UN reports, when you read the information, they really don't have hard evidence. They really don't have the link of who actually used chemical weapons. They're making a lot of assumptions. And this is what the United States government central bankers do. They assume, they use propaganda to convince everyone. Now, a couple reports ago, I said the United States government central bankers have three options in Syria. Peace. They'll just say, you know something, we're beaten in Syria. We're just going to leave. We'll let the collapse happen. And the collapse happens, and then there's war. That's the third one. And the one with peace, they might be pushing that not in the way we think. Because we understand that the United States government central bankers have been working with the Kurds. They've been building bases in Syria. The French have been building bases in Syria. And they've been working with the Kurds, the United States government, in Iraq. And what I'm seeing right now is that Turkey is clearing the way and clearing an area saying this is a safe zone. And we mentioned this before, where most likely what they're going to try to do is go to Russia, go to Syria and say, listen, the Kurds in Iraq and Syria, they want their own country. They want to be separate and apart. And we've outlined the area which they will control. And it looks like what they're going to try to do is separate Syria and Iraq and have a Syria-Iraq-Kurd region. Because this will then allow the United States government central bankers to build a pipeline. And eventually what they'll do is they'll go after Assad later on. And this might be what they're trying to do. We'll have to see how it works out, how Assad, Russia reacts to all of this. But we can see that this could be a possibility where they say we've come up with a peace plan. And this is something that we need to watch. But we can see right now, no matter what they do at this point, the entire system will not last. They will not be able to get into Iran. They will not be able to control the Middle East. Because we can see that it is falling apart. It's getting too hard to control. The people are rising up, and the petrodollar is doomed. And we can see right now, after these elections, after all of this is over, what are we going to be left with? An economy that is collapsing. We'll be on the brink of war. And whoever is in power, well, they're going to have to answer to the shadow government and follow their orders. Which means the system is collapsing. We are headed to war. Unless the people put aside their differences and say, listen, we're done. We don't want this anymore. We don't want this type of government. We don't want a shadow government. We don't want a central bank. We're not going to fight this war for you. If we stay divided, it will never happen. We need to set aside all of this, Democrat, Republican, doesn't make a difference, and look at who the real enemy is. It's those hiding behind the curtain. And until we do this, I don't think anything's going to change. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.